You're listening to Gulsa Podcast, the place for real talk, fresh perspectives, and stories that actually matter. Stay tuned. It's about to get interesting.
Picture this, right? It's 6 a.m. on December 1st, 1948. You're in Adelaide, Australia.
Early summer down there.
Exactly, yeah. Early summer light. Two horseback riders are, making their way down Somerton Beach. The tide is out, the sand is cool, and as they ride, they spot this figure up ahead.
Just a smartly dressed man.
Yeah, a smartly dressed man just slumped against the seawall. His legs are crossed, and he looks like he's just, peacefully fallen asleep there in the sand. But as they get closer, the reality sets in. He's dead.
Right.
And resting gently on the collar of his pristine shirt is a half-smoked cigarette.
It's just an incredibly eerie image.
Yeah.
The perfect stillness of it all. You look at that scene and you immediately know something profound has happened, but literally every single visual cue contradicts the fact that this man is deceased.
Right. And that profound stillness, that is the starting line for our mission today. We are taking you on a deep dive into one of Australia's most infamous cold cases, the Somerton Man. We're pulling from historical autopsy reports, declassified intelligence files, and the incredibly detailed 2022 genetic research notes from Professor Derek Abbott.
It's a wild ride.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to navigate this crazy maze of untraceable poisons, secret codes, and intense Cold War paranoia. And we're going to follow that maze all the way to a stunning DNA breakthrough that just, it completely flips the script on everything we thought we knew.
Which is a journey we really have to take because, civilized societies have this deep, almost primal imperative to preserve the identities of the dead, right?
Yeah, of course.
We name our children at birth, we mark our graves when we pass. But this case is the chilling opposite of that instinct. We're looking at a man whose identity was painstakingly, deliberately, and surgically erased.
Yeah, erased is the perfect word. To understand why this case baffled the entire world for over 7 decades, we really have to start with the physical evidence left right there on the sand. Or, rather, the lack of it. Let's look at his pockets.
What did they find?
Well, you would expect a wallet or maybe some identification, but investigators found 0 ID. None. What they did find was an unused second-class railway ticket to Henley Beach, a bus ticket he'd used the day before, a pack of juicy fruit gum, an aluminum comb, and some matches.
Just everyday stuff.
Right. But the detail that really catches your eye is his cigarettes. He had an Army Club cigarette pack, but it was stuffed with a totally different, much more expensive brand of cigarettes called Concetas.
Which is such a weird little detail. It's a small deception, sure, but it hints at a methodical mindset, someone who is carefully managing appearances or maybe managing their resources.
And that methodical mindset goes to a terrifying extreme when you look at his clothes, because every single manufacturer label had been cut out of his garments. Not torn in a struggle either. Snipped right out with scissors.
That specific detail immediately elevates this, right? It takes it from a tragic, anonymous death to a deliberate mystery, and the autopsy, it really only deepens the confusion.
Oh, the autopsy is bizarre.
Right, so the pathologist, John Barclay Bennett, examines the body and finds a man in his early 40s in remarkable physical condition. His heart is completely healthy, but the internal landscape tells a violently different story.
Yeah, his organs were basically destroyed, right?
Exactly. His spleen is 3 times its normal size, and his organs, the liver, the kidneys, the stomach, they are intensely congested with blood.
When I was reading the medical reports, that severe blood congestion just jumped out as a massive red flag for poisoning. But the chemistry lab tests came back completely clean. No cyanides, no alkaloids, no barbiturates, just a healthy guy with severely damaged internal organs.
Which is exactly where the limits of 1948 forensic science come into play.
Oh.
Prominent pharmacologists at the time, like Sir Cedric Stanton Hicks, suspected a fast-acting, untraceable poison.
Untraceable.
Yes, specifically plant-based toxins like strophanthin or digitalis. The way these toxins work is by forcing the heart muscle to contract with massive, lethal force. So it pushes blood forcefully into the organs. But they metabolize and break down so rapidly that by the time a body's on the autopsy table, there is virtually no chemical signature left behind for a 1940s lab to detect.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on one hand, it sounds incredibly sinister. It's like an Agatha Christie novel where the murder weapon just, evaporates into thin air.
Right.
But I have to push back here a little bit. Isn't it highly possible that 1940s pathologists just blamed invisible poison when they couldn't find a natural cause? Medical science in 1948 had significant blind spots.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if a healthy guy drops dead and you can't find a tumor or a bullet hole, an undetectable toxin feels like a really convenient scientific scapegoat for an incompetent lab.
That is a very valid critique, actually. And modern pathologists have raised the exact same point. There was no vomit sound at the scene or on his clothes, which is highly unusual for a lethal, agonizing poisoning.
Right.
It could have been an undetectable toxin, yes, but it could also have been an undiagnosed illness, or even positional asphyxiation from the way his head was slumped against the seawall, cutting off his airway.
Because the internal organs offered no solid answers, the press desperately grabbed onto the physical oddities of his actual body. The autopsy notes highlight some bizarre physical traits.
Yeah, the feet.
His toes were wedge-shaped, almost as if he spent his life bound in pointed heels. And his calf muscles were unusually overdeveloped.
Which sent the media into a total frenzy. When you have high-heeled shoes and muscular calves, the immediate public assumption was that he was a professional ballet dancer.
But a ballet dancer doesn't really explain the surgically removed labels, you know, or the missing wallet. The lack of identity on the body forced investigators to look outward. They needed a broader footprint. And weeks later, in January 1949, they got a massive delayed break at the local train station.
Finally.
Yeah. Staff at the Adelaide railway station realized a brown suitcase was checked into their cloakroom on November 30th, which was the day before the man died.
Abandoned luggage is such a fascinating psychological artifact. It really gives you a snapshot of a person's life frozen in transit.
Totally. And the contents of this suitcase were a bizarre mix of the mundane and the deeply suspicious. You've got clothing, a shaving kit, a toothbrush, shoe polish. But just like the body on the beach, every single label has been removed from the clothes.
It's so deliberate.
Then investigators find a stenciling brush, the specific kind used by officers on merchant ships to stencil cargo crates. They find a table knife that has been deliberately cut down and filed into a sharp, concealable point, sharpened scissors. And perhaps the most crucial physical link, tying the bag to the body, a spool of rare orange barber waxed thread.
That thread is the linchpin right there. Barber wax thread was heavy-duty, typically used in military or maritime repairs, and it was not commercially available in Australia at the time. The police found that this exact rare thread perfectly matched a repair made to the lining of the dead man's trousers.
It's a smoking gun. But whoever packed this suitcase seemingly slipped up. 3 items in that luggage still had name tags attached, a tie read T. Keen, a laundry bag read Keen, and a vest read Keen without the E. For a brief moment, the police thought they had their man.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, the intelligence community saw something entirely different. You really have to put yourself in the mindset of 1948.
The start of the Cold War.
Exactly. This is the absolute dawn of the Cold War. Australia is not just a quiet observer here. There is intense, top-secret Anglo-Australian rocket and weapons testing happening at Woomera, which is relatively close to Adelaide.
Wow, okay.
So you have a physically fit man with no identity, killed by a potentially untraceable poison. His clothing has American-style stitching. Someone has gone to surgical lengths to remove identifying labels from his body and his luggage.
Right, so for the public, this just screams espionage.
Precisely. And those Keen tags, intelligence experts assumed they were a deliberate psychological tactic. Spies remove all the real labels and deliberately leave fake ones, knowing it will send counterintelligence and local police down a frustrating, time-consuming dead end.
Which worked perfectly.
Yeah.
The police checked every missing person file for a T. Keen across the English-speaking world, and they found absolutely nothing. But this logic, it always bothered me.
How so?
If you're listening to this and wondering why a master spy would be so sloppy, you are not alone. I mean, if you are trying to disappear, or if an agency is trying to make a body disappear, why leave a breadcrumb trail at a highly public train station? Why check a bag at all? If you want a ghost, throw the suitcase in the ocean.
It highlights the paradox of this case, doesn't it? We see the hallmarks of a professional operative mixed with the baffling decisions of a desperate amateur. Do you leave a decoy to buy time, or do you leave nothing at all?
Yeah. And just as the public and the police are fully buying into this international master spy theory, investigators take a second look at the embalmed body. And they find an invisible clue that pivots this entire investigation from a Cold War thriller into a bizarre, ancient literary puzzle.
This part is amazing. So, months after the body was found, a pathologist doing a re-examination discovers a tiny, secretly sewn fob pocket, usually meant for a pocket watch, hidden deep inside the waistband of the man's trousers.
And they missed it during the first autopsy.
They did. It was so small and so expertly tailored, they completely missed it the first time. Inside this secret pocket is a scrap of paper, tightly rolled up. They unroll it, and it says 2 printed words, Tamám Shud.
Tamám Shud. It sounds like a sign-off from an assassin.
It certainly carries a heavy finality to it. It's actually a Persian phrase that translates to finished or ended. But its origin is incredibly poignant. A journalist recognized the distinctive font. The scrap had been torn from the final page of a 12th century book of Persian poems called the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyam.
Okay, so it's poetry.
Yeah, specifically the 1859 translation by Edward Fitzgerald. And the philosophy of this specific book is deeply existential. It focuses on seizing the day, drinking deeply from the cup of life, and accepting mortality with absolutely no regrets when the time comes to die.
The police obviously launched a massive public hunt for this specific book, and by a wild stroke of luck, a man comes forward. He reports that on the night the Somerton man died, his brother-in-law's car was parked near the beach with the window rolled down, and someone literally tossed a copy of the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyam through the open window onto the back seat. The police take the book, they line up the scrap of paper from the dead man's secret pocket, and the tier matches perfectly.
Finding the book is one thing, but what the police found in the book blew the case wide open. Under UV light, they discovered faint indentations on the back cover, as if someone had used the book as a hard surface to write on. They uncover an unlisted phone number, and below that, 5 lines of a scrambled code consisting of strings of capital letters. For example, the first line is WRGOABABD, and the second line is crossed out, indicating the writer caught a mistake in their own encryption.
Here is where the mechanism of the mystery gets really fascinating. When cryptographers looked at those letters, they suspected a one-time pad cipher. If you aren't familiar with cryptology, think of a one-time pad like 2 identical jigsaw puzzles.
Okay, good analogy.
If I send you a single puzzle piece with a message written on it, you can only read it if you have the exact same puzzle box to see where it fits. In this scenario, that specific 1859 edition of the book is the puzzle box. The sender and receiver both have a copy, and they use the specific words on specific pages to scramble the message.
The brilliance of a one-time pad is that if you don't have the exact book serving as the key, it is practically an unbreakable analog encryption. No supercomputer can crack it because the key is physical, unique, and random. Intelligence agencies favored book ciphers for this exact reason.
Because it's innocent enough.
Exactly. A poetry book is common enough not to arouse suspicion during a search, but specific enough to serve as an impenetrable lock.
But while a secret code is cold, mathematical, and abstract, that phone number found above it anchors this global mystery right back into the local neighborhood.
Yes, the phone number.
The police trace the scribbled phone number, and it leads them to a 27-year-old nurse named Jessica Thompson. For decades, the press only knew her by the pseudonym Jestyn, and she lived just a few minutes' walk from exactly where the body was found on Somerton Beach.
That geographic proximity makes it impossible to view her as a random bystander.
Absolutely. So the police bring her in and show her the plaster bust, the death mask they made of the Somerton man. The interviewing detective noted her reaction was dramatic. She looked completely taken aback to the point where she seemed like she was about to faint right there on the floor.
But she denies knowing him.
Vehemently denies ever knowing him. She stares at a dead man who had her unlisted number written on a book he was carrying, who died steps from her house, and insists she has never seen him in her life.
This raises an important question, though. It forces you to analyze her behavior under pressure. A person does not nearly faint looking at a complete stranger. She did admit to the police that she previously owned a copy of that exact book, the Rubáiyát, but she claimed she gave her copy to an Australian Army lieutenant named Alfred Boxall during World War II.
You can imagine the police celebrating in the precinct. They think they've cracked it. The dead guy is Alfred Boxall.
That elation lasted exactly until they tracked down Alfred Boxall. He was alive, well, working at a bus depot in Sydney, and he still had his copy of the book, completely intact, with Jessica's inscription inside.
Leaving Jessica Thompson as an impenetrable wall in the investigation. She took her secrets to her grave in 2007, but years later, her own daughter, Kate, gave an interview that just poured gasoline on the spy theory fires.
Oh, her daughter's claims were wild.
Kate claimed her mother definitely had a dark side. She revealed Jessica could speak Russian, refusing to say where she learned it, and that Jessica had allegedly confessed she knew exactly who the Somerton man was, but his identity was a matter for higher powers.
The introduction of higher powers and hidden language skills only cements the espionage narrative. But the most compelling evidence tying Jessica to the Somerton Man wasn't spoken. It was biological.
This is the detail that kept the romance and tragedy of the case alive for decades. Jessica Thompson had a son, Robin, born in 1947, a year before the Somerton Man died. Decades later, researchers noticed Robin Thompson shared two incredibly rare genetic traits with the dead man on the beach.
The ears and the teeth, right?
Yeah. They both had upper ear hollows, the Simba, that were significantly larger than the lower hollows, and they both had canine teeth that rotated slightly toward the front of the mouth. The statistical probability of one person having both of those specific genetic traits is less than 1% of the general population.
When you look at the math on that, the narrative almost writes itself. Was this not a Cold War assassination, but a tragic love story? A secret agent visiting his hidden child one last time, only to be poisoned by his enemies, or perhaps even by the mother herself, to protect her new life.
For over 70 years, that was the heartbreaking dead end. An unidentified man, an unbroken code, and a nurse who refused to talk. But remember that plaster dev mask that made Jessica Thompson nearly faint? It was holding a microscopic secret, one that only 21st century science could finally unlock.
The breakthrough here relies on a phenomenal technical achievement by Professor Derek Abbott from the University of Adelaide, alongside American forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick. Back in 1948, when they made that plaster cast of the Somerton Man's face, a few of his hairs got trapped in the drying plaster.
And usually to extract usable nuclear DNA from hair, you need the follicle, right? The root.
Right.
But these were just broken, rootless hairs trapped in a chemical matrix for 7 decades.
Exactly the kind of degraded sample that used to be a complete dead end. But Abbott's team used advanced techniques to sequence the tiny, fragmented mitochondrial DNA left in the hair shaft itself. It is essentially like trying to read a heavily redacted, shredded document by taping microscopic pieces back together until you finally get a readable sequence.
Once they had that DNA profile, they applied forensic genealogy, the exact same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer. They uploaded the profile to GED Match, a public genetic database.
And it's not magic, it takes a lot of work.
Right. Don't just plug in DNA and get a flashing name on a screen. They found distant 4th or 5th cousins who shared maybe 1% of the Somerton Man's DNA. From there, Fitzpatrick and Abbott painstakingly built a family tree of over 4,000 people. They had to trace those cousins backward to a common ancestor in the 1800s and then build every branch forward in time, looking for a male who fit the physical description and, crucially, had no recorded date of death.
The sheer volume of archival work is staggering. But out of those 4,000 people, the science steadily narrowed down to a single branch and finally a single leaf. The Somerton Man was given his name back, Carl Charles Webb, born in 1905 in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne, Victoria.
Carl Webb. Once they had the name, investigators started applying it to the clues, and the entire narrative structure of the mystery collapsed into something completely unexpected. Let's look at the cut-down table knife and the stenciling brush in the suitcase, the tools that supposedly proved he was a saboteur.
Carl Webb was a trained electrical engineer and an instrument maker. Modifying tools, working with specialized thread, and dealing with intricate machinery was literally his day job.
Wow. And what about the clothes with all the labels cut out, except for the ones that said T. Keene, the brilliant counterintelligence red herring?
It wasn't a red herring at all.
Nope. Carl Webb had a brother-in-law named Thomas Keene. The clothes in the suitcase were just hand-me-downs from his relative. And the missing labels. Maybe he just had sensory issues with itchy tags, or he bought them secondhand during post-war rationing and removed the previous owner's names.
The mundane reality systematically dismantling the myth. And the most devastating biological clue. The rare ears and teeth that statistically proved Robin Thompson was his secret son.
The DNA results were absolute. Carl Webb had 0 genetic relationship to Robin Thompson. It was just a colossal, statistically improbable coincidence.
Which leads us to deduce his motive. Why was an instrument maker from Melbourne sitting on a beach in Adelaide? Historical records show that in 1947, a year before his death, Carl Webb separated from his wife, Dorothy. She left him and moved to a town called Butte, which is near Adelaide. The most logical explanation is that a lonely, heartbroken Carl Webb traveled to South Australia to find his estranged wife.
Wait, I'm struggling to reconcile this. We have a guy carrying modified tools, clothes with surgically removed tags, and an unbreakable book cipher, and you're telling me he's just an electrical engineer going through a bad breakup. How does an instrument maker accidentally invent an unbreakable spy code in the back of a Persian poetry book?
Because it likely wasn't a spy code at all. Records indicate Carl Webb had two great passions outside of his work. He loved writing poetry and he loved betting on the horses.
You're kidding.
No, seriously. For years, cryptographers hypothesized that the code wasn't a cipher, but an acronym, the first letters of words in a sentence. Once they knew Webb's identity, the grand espionage thriller evaporates. That impenetrable intelligence code is highly likely just a list of racehorses' names he was tracking or a personal poem he was trying to draft.
Wow. We just took a Cold War spy thriller complete with untraceable poisons, a nurse with a dark past and secret codes, and we turned it back into the incredibly human, melancholy story of a guy named Carl Webb sitting on a beach reading a book of poems about mortality far from home.
A profoundly human story. But we really must be careful not to close the book completely. Science and genealogy gave Carl Webb his name back, but the why and the how of his death remains buried with him. The authorities have not definitively ruled if it was suicide, an accidental overdose of some kind, a natural medical event, or foul play. The DNA solved his identity, but it cannot perform an autopsy on a 70-year-old cold case.
That is a haunting thought. And it leads me to one final lingering question for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Think about the lengths this man went to. Even if the T-Keen clothes were hand-me-downs, he still took a pair of scissors and meticulously cut the tags out of every other piece of clothing he was wearing.
Every single one.
He carried no wallet, no ID, no keys. He tore a tiny scrap of paper out of a book and sewed it into a hidden pocket. Carl Webb went to astonishing, meticulous lengths to erase himself entirely from the world.
He deliberately sought anonymity and death.
So here is the question. If a person spends their final agonizing moments ensuring that they disappear forever, that their identity dies with them on that cool sand, do we, 7 decades later, have the moral right to strip away that anonymity just because our modern DNA technology allows us to?
It forces us to weigh the public's right to the truth against an individual's right to disappear.
It does. Next time you look at a mystery, remember Carl Webb, the man who tried to end his story with Tamám Shud. It is finished, only for science to write him a whole new chapter.
You've been listening to Gulsa Podcast. If you enjoyed this, make sure to follow, share, and stay tuned. Bigger conversations coming your way.